afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Forum on the Hill. Thank you all so much for being here today. This is our second to last forum of the season. We take a break after May and we'll be back in September, but we are really pleased to have our speakers here today to talk to us about building ghosts. And I'm very excited to hear what they have to say. A little bit about them. Molly Lester is a historian of the built environment and currently serves as the Associate Director of the Urban Heritage Project at the University of Pennsylvania's Weitzman School of Design. Her research interests include the ephemeral traces of building ghosts in the built environment and the role of women in shaping the American built environment in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Also with us today is Michael Bixler, and he is the editorial director and chief photographer of Hidden City, Philadelphia. His writing and photography is focused on creating dialogue and documentation of the built environment and how it relates to history, culture, and the urban experience. Please join me in welcoming Molly and Michael.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for having us. I'm a lifelong Presbyterian, so this is especially gratifying to me. Yeah, my parents are both Presbyterian ministers, so here we go, full circle moment. All right. In late 2012, I was wandering with a friend through Northern Liberties. We strolled up North 2nd Street, sidling up alongside the broad Baroque front of St. Michael's Church and the brick buildings that flank it. The parish is an undeniably monumental presence in the neighborhood, and yet it was a different pile of bricks, the one you're seeing right here, that caught my eye just beyond the church. In a vacant lot at a quiet intersection, an unassuming heap of blocks foregrounded and were clearly responsible for a building ghost at the edge of the parcel. I'd lived in Philadelphia for several years at this point, and I'm sure it wasn't the first ghost I'd ever passed, but it was the first one I saw. A stair that snaked its way up the wall, the outline of a former foyer, a series of lines in the attic gable clearly left over from a set of shelves. The ghost mesmerized me, just as my first college course in architectural history had done several years before, when I first fell in love with the history of old buildings and cultural landscapes. But where my coursework and jobs to this point had mostly focused on grand structures with unquestioned significance, this building ghost of a modest row house claimed a different sort of authority. As everyone in this room knows, I think, when you live in an old place like Philadelphia, lavish buildings such as St. Michael's Church may be accents in the streetscape, sparking a thrill when you encounter them, but it's the commonplace buildings such as this erstwhile row house that actually define the everyday. I wanted to know more about this utterly mundane building, to draw on all the same detective skills that I need for my higher profile research subjects, but deploy them for a building with no name or famous residents. But in the weeks that followed, I somehow lost the ghost. I went back to Northern Liberties alone, wandering in search of the exposed wall I had stood in front of so recently. I couldn't orient myself, and there were no empty lots to be found as I radiated out from the starting point of the church. Belatedly, I realized that the active construction site at 2nd and Jefferson Streets and my empty lot were one and the same. The building ghost was no longer visible as a new structure rose to take its place. It was an unfortunate lesson about the nature of building ghosts, which may vanish as quickly as they once materialized. In the years that followed, I researched the former ghost anyway and wrote a piece about its idiosyncratic history for Hidden City, Philadelphia. Various work projects took me to every corner of the city, and I documented other building ghosts as I found them, having learned my lesson about trying to return later to a building ghost. I started noticing patterns. What kinds of buildings become ghosts, how long the ghosts last, where ghosts do and do not occur in the broad reaches of the city. I started an Instagram account to chronicle my ghostly wanderings and found that plenty of friends and strangers were enamored by them too. Among them was my friend Michael Bixler, photographer and managing editor of Hidden City, Philadelphia. He would send me ghosts from his own travels, photos that were much more artful and crisp than mine, hooked with the same curiosity that I shared. Eventually, I decided to explore this passion project with more rigor, and I enlisted him and his photographic expertise. I applied for funding from a source at Penn and received a seed grant in early 2020. When the world shut down in the face of the pandemic, I took solace in dreaming about the project that would take shape when we could venture out again. Confined to my house and immediate vicinity, I missed my city. I went months without seeing neighborhoods and people that I loved. As many of us hunkered down, building ghosts became emblematic for me of the moment in which we found ourselves. Suspended in time, they symbolized some inherent measure of loss and absence. Finally, in fall 2020, Michael and I launched the project that would become this book. Hungry for exploration, we trekked all over Philadelphia in our spare time in search of ghosts. For all the pain of that period of 2020, there was something appropriate about embarking on this venture in that moment. The pandemic reframed so many aspects of our lives, and building ghosts wield a similar power, forcing a re-examination of their context. They have a way of making even familiar places look strange, exposing a rift between what we think we remember of a building and what we see after it's gone. This book exists in that uncertain interlude, dwelling on these lost buildings and found ghosts as an invitation to see the city around us in a new way. So what then are we talking about when we talk about building ghosts? Building ghosts are the imprint and last impressions of a demolished building, left behind on the walls of the neighboring structures. Physically, they are architectural remnants that can be found only in a rowhouse city such as Philadelphia, where the loss of one structure leaves a tangible mark on its neighbors. What you're seeing on the screen right now is a montage of typical features you would find in a ghost. Things like a fireplace, you can see the label for that in the center, right there. That's the traces of a fireplace. You can see this is the remnants of where the foyer would have been. There's tile there that indicates that. And things like the structural joist pockets on each story that would have held up the building. These ghosts can be ephemeral, as you see on the left, or enduring, as you see on the right, quickly revealed and replaced in a neighborhood seeing rapid change, or unveiled and exposed indefinitely in a neighborhood that hasn't seen new construction in a long time. In the simplest sense, these ghosts are artistic objects, beautiful, sometimes legible, and confounding all at once. But these vestiges of structures, stairs, wallpaper, closets are also legacies, hinting at the lives lived within these walls, the communities shaped around these buildings, and the ways in which we create and erase history in our changing cities. Our book investigates, mourns, and celebrates these ghosts in our midst, retracing their structures and selves, and dwelling in the moment between a place's loss and its erasure. We should open by defining our terms, beginning with the choice to refer to this type of remnant as a building ghost rather than a ghost building, as it's sometimes known. We didn't coin either term. But it is important to note that a building ghost is not simply a building that is in the process of being demolished. It's not enough for it only to be demolished. If that structure does not abut its neighbors, it is not capable of creating a building ghost. A building ghost, or ghost for short, is by definition the trace of a demolished building that remains on that shared party wall, even after it's gone. It's also distinct from a ghost sign. Those are also a popular phenomenon, if you're familiar with them, the paint traces of faded advertisements, things like that. So we're not talking about those today or in the book. We're leaving them as a separate phenomenon that occurs in cities. The further we got into this project, the more we found that we needed words to define two recurring phenomena related to building ghosts. Thus, the idea of a double ghost, which we use to mean a lot in which there's a ghost on each side, as we found here at 333 North 11th Street. In other words, the demolished building was located in the middle of a block. Its empty parcel then features two ghosts instead of one. We needed a second word to describe a ghost whose presence is so long-standing as to suggest permanence. For these situations, we described them as legacy ghosts. The simplest kind of legacy ghost is one that happens to overlook an empty lot that remains available for new construction and has been poised that way for some time. Michael will show you several examples of these in a moment. But the more complex type of legacy ghost survives in spite of new construction that might have replaced it. In the case that you're seeing here on the screen, which is on Rittenhouse Square, the ghost of the former building at 1828 Rittenhouse Square survives on the side wall of its neighbor that they coexisted at the time together, but the building that had been at 1828 Rittenhouse Square got demolished so that this tower could get constructed, and yet the ghost remained on that shared wall. Each building ghost is not merely an artistic object unto itself, although many of them create an odd and beautiful sort of art, but a palimpsest of the artists who created the demolished building over generations of people and time. Building ghosts juxtapose the solidity of the wall and the void of the vacant lot left behind, the tangible and the missing, the past and the present, and the pending or suspended future. We look to building ghosts then to point out the voids of people and place, to confront the ghosts we've inherited and the ghosts we've made. Our intention with this book was to turn urban heritage inside out, making a study of the built environment by looking at what is not built at all. In doing so, the book starts where most interpretations of architecture stop, the moment a structure is demolished. The project required a blend of archival research and contemporary photography, but first it required seeing every corner of this city. Together and alone, Michael and I walked, biked, bussed, trolleyed, trained, and drove all over the city, noting every instance of a building ghost we could find, including several that were crowdsourced by friends and strangers. It would be impossible to count the miles we covered between the two of us, but the surveyed number was clear: 194 building ghosts observed in 4 months, a fraction of which you're seeing here. Some existed for mere hours, others, according to older photographs, have been around for decades. Such is the nature of building ghosts. We mapped every single ghost that we found, establishing a timestamp and creating a census, for those 4 months at least. If you tried to find all 194 ghosts today, you would not be able to. Sometimes, even between the two of us, we couldn't revisit a ghost from one day to the next. The timestamp of a city's building ghosts refreshes every moment. In mapping these ghosts, and the dozens of others that we found, clear patterns started to emerge, where they show up by the dozens and where they are not present at all. I know we're in Northwest Philly today, and I'm going to talk about why there's so few up here, but I would note that you are in good company with Northeast Philly, and I'm also going to talk about that. I think this map and the larger study of building ghosts offers tangible traces of the intangible themes of community history, demolition, dislocation, and neighborhood change. Conscious of those implications, I reconstructed the story of 40 of those ghosts that we found. These vignettes, 2 of which I'll share today, are stories, but they are not fiction. Some recount the full trajectory of the building from construction to demolition, while others salvage only a fragment of a building's existence. All of them, however, rely on extensive research in deeds, censuses, city directories, insurance maps, newspapers, genealogical records, aerial photographs, books, magazines, and only in the rarest of instances, historic images. No matter how many stones I turned, though, the vignettes are inescapably incomplete, as is the encounter with any building ghost. Our census found that ghosts existed in most neighborhoods, but they were not the same in every neighborhood. When it comes to building ghosts, not all communities are created or destroyed equally. For this reason, the book is organized geographically, but it is weighted proportionally. For city sections with more surveyed ghosts, we've included more ghosts in the book. For those with hardly a ghost for miles, such as Northwest Philly, our selections reflect that reality. Building ghosts offer stark realities to reflect on and reckon with. Thus, each section of the book begins with an essay provoked by, but certainly not exclusive to, the ghosts in that section of the city. Today, given where we are, I'll share the essay about Northwest and Northeast Philly in a moment. These reflections grapple with the present-day residences of building ghosts and what they might reveal about how cities evolve. Where the vignettes dwell on individual ghosts, the essays examine the connections among many ghosts. The vignettes address the more distant past, and the essays consider the present and near future tense. Building ghosts, and our book about them, are thus stitched together across space and time. I'm going to pass the mic to Michael to talk about his photography process, and then I'll come back and share that essay with you.
So our book is all about context, from Molly's detailed research to her pursuit of instructive, timely themes supported by hard data. For my part, it was important that the photographs both respond in direct conversation with their text, while at the same time tell a story of their own through visual context that puts the viewer into the scene. I set out to document the remains of wallpaper, staircases, and floor joists, the quintessential elements of building ghosts, but I also sought to capture more, like entire adjacent buildings, spans of intact row houses, and a streetscape of featured neighborhoods, for nuanced urban context. I often found that construction equipment, bowing facades, bent street signs, graffiti, and even bags of trash and piles of debris were just as important to include in the frame as the actual building ghost itself. This was a way to bring historical narratives and sociological observations full circle. For a book centered on the lives of people, you may notice when you look through the book that there are not many people in the photographs. Part of this was a byproduct of the pandemic, but there were also some intention at play. We began our photo documentation process in September 2020 as COVID-19 infections were still raging, and the CDC continued to urge the public to continue social distancing. While commercial and construction activity had resumed, there was a lingering desolation in many parts of the city. Schools were still closed and people were largely staying indoors. This made it easier to focus on the building ghost location at hand. With the absence of people and the distraction of dodging moving cars, I was able to connect with our subjects in a more concentrated and meaningful way. I focused on dignifying each ghost and their neighboring buildings. In a way, I wanted to treat them with emotional care. When I did come across people taking a walk or sitting with their family on their stoop, we'd have a great conversation about why I was taking pictures of empty lots. There was a genuine interest in our project, especially in North Philadelphia, where I spent more than a month documenting. After chatting with folks for a while, I would direct them to our Instagram account to follow along with the project and maybe even participate. So there are usually two reasons for building ghosts to appear. There's demolition by way of real estate development, what we call temporary ghosts, and destruction through deferred maintenance, which is typically caused by disinvestment in a neighborhood. These are what we call legacy ghosts. As Molly mentioned, we decided to limit the photo documentation process to 4 months. We set a hard, fast rule that I could not go back to rephotograph a location, no matter how much I disliked the original. By doing so, it was hard. By doing so, we have created a frozen moment in time. In development-heavy neighborhoods, building ghosts are fleeting as new construction fills newly vacant lots, often faster than they are created. In places like North Philadelphia, some building ghosts have been exposed for decades and remain that way for years to come. So this first set of photographs show temporary ghosts caused by real estate development. And this is 701 South 19th Street and Graduate Hospital in South Philadelphia. It was the former headquarters of the Foreign Mission Board, National Baptist Convention, USA, which was founded in 1800 by a group of Black Baptist ministers. The building was demolished in 2020 by a developer to make way for a 6-unit mid-rise apartment complex. And this is 1803 Ridge Avenue. It's in Francisville in lower North Philadelphia. This was originally a flat iron building, and it was demolished in 2020 by a developer for the construction of a 5-unit apartment complex. And this is 1826 Frankfurt Avenue in Fishtown. And it was demolished by a developer in 2020 to make way for a 4-story, 6-unit condominium complex. And we're back in South Philly. This is 1828 Christian Street in Graduate Hospital. It was demolished in 2020 by a developer to make way for a new 4-story row house. And lastly, this is 830 North 4th Street in Northern Liberties. It was demolished by the owner in 2018. The empty lot is still being used as a garden by an adjoining property. So this next set shows legacy ghosts created by demolition due to disinvestment and neglect, which is a whole other ballgame. Okay, so this is 2546 North 28th Street in Strawberry Mansion, North Philly. It was demolished through the Department of Licenses and Inspections demolition program in 2020. It is currently a vacant, overgrown lot. And this is 2562 Napa Street, again in Strawberry Mansion. It was demolished in 2019 by L&I's demolition program. The empty lot is currently owned by the City of Philadelphia. And this is 2240 Master Street in Sharswood in North Philadelphia. It was demolished in 2014. It's currently owned by the Philadelphia Housing Authority. And in 2023, so we took these photographs in 2020. In 2023, the Housing Authority demolished the home pictured here at 2242 Master Street, and it is currently a vacant lot. And that's kind of a central theme. There's a lot of loss in the book where you'll see this building otherwise would be kind of passed by, and it's memorialized in our book because now it doesn't exist anymore. Same with this one. 2312 Cleveland Street in North Philly was demolished in 2017 by L&I's demolition program. The vacant lot, which you see here, is currently owned by the City of Philadelphia. And in 2021, L&I demolished the home pictured here at 2314 Cleveland Street. And both are one big vacant lot. And coming full circle back to real estate development, where kind of disinvestment real estate development meet. This is 3029 Ridge Avenue in Strawberry Mansion. And the lot there, it was demolished sometime between 2009 and 2011 by the owner. And in 2024, a developer filed zoning permits with L&I to build a 3-unit, 3-story structure on the lot. Great.
As I mentioned, the book is organized geographically with neighborhood-scale essays that reflect on contemporary implications of building ghosts, and then the vignettes, 2 of which I'll share. Here then is the essay for Northwest and Northeast Philadelphia. It takes persistence to find a building ghost in Northwest or Northeast Philadelphia. Block after block, street after road, and pike after avenue, ghosts are a rarity in these upper corners of the city. In so many other physical, demographic, and socioeconomic ways, the Northwest and Northeast would seem to be distinct from each other, and I'm sure everybody in this room has strong thoughts about that. Yet for all their differences, the swaths of Philadelphia mirrored across the northern extents of Broad Street share one undeniable reality. Ghosts just simply don't appear here. In many areas of Northwest Philadelphia, the age of the building stock would seem to lend itself to ghosts. The roots of Germantown, after all, are as old or older as the city itself. In the upper western reaches of the city, as in many other parts of Philadelphia, the 19th century's industrializing surge translated to extensive development in Mount Airy, Wissahickon, and other enclaves. Yet most of the equivalent industrial-era neighborhoods elsewhere in the city are pockmarked by many more building ghosts than the Northwest can claim. Why would that be? The answer is in the type of building stock, not the age. The green space that defines much of the Northwest buffers mostly detached single-family homes. Without a party wall, the Northwest's buildings cannot produce building ghosts. When one building comes down, there isn't a neighboring building right there to leave its trace on. This is most obvious in the upscale and scaled-up houses of Chestnut Hill and West Mount Airy, but it's also generally true of the buildings in West Oak Lane, Tulpehocken, Stenton, and elsewhere. Some neighborhoods west of the Wissahickon would seem to belie the pattern, Maniac comes to mind. But even there, the smallest sliver of daylight between buildings, those precious bits of lawn or sidewalk that separate buildings at any scale, can preclude a building ghost from ever existing in the Northwest. The Northeast, meanwhile, on the whole, would not seem to share this same architectural reality. Communities such as Mayfair, Holmesburg, and Somerdale are undeniably dense. Nearly 1 in 3 Philadelphians lives in the Northeast, so clearly there is some measure of living shoulder to shoulder in this part of the city. The physical conditions of the built environment would seem then to lend themselves to ample building ghosts, and yet they don't. Unlike its analog in the Northwest, the Northeast's dearth of ghosts can be explained by patterns of building age, not type. This is not to say that the landscape in the Northeast isn't rich with centuries of history and development. In Frankfurt alone, the Lenape band of Native Americans lived on the land long before colonists arrived, not to mention the establishment of any colony in the name of William Penn and his woods. But despite these layers of embedded history, much of the extant building stock of Northeast Philly is decidedly more recent. In a city where much of the building stock originated in the 18th and 19th centuries, the urban fabric in the Northeast is generally newer. These neighborhoods saw accelerated development in the mid-20th century, spurred by the completion of Roosevelt Boulevard and the demand for new housing after World War II. Some of the post-war housing developments replicated the spacing of suburban developments, but this configuration does not lend itself to building ghosts. Several other developments adapted the classic Philadelphia row house for the post-war era, capitalizing on the form's efficiencies to produce dense housing for a booming population. Even on these blocks, though, building ghosts are rare or even non-existent for one simple reason, I believe and I argue. The buildings aren't yet old enough to seem disposable. They don't come down at the same rate as their older siblings in other areas of the city, because in the timeline of a centuries-old city, they only just went up. There is an additional explanation that rationalizes the relative absence of building ghosts in the Northwest and Northeast, one that links them rather than distinguishes them, and that is their preponderance of middle neighborhoods. It's a term popularized by the planner Paul C. Brophy, a native of Hunting Park here in Philadelphia, and it describes several neighborhoods in these sections of the city, including West Oak Lane, Stenton, some areas of Germantown, and so on in the Northwest, Mayfair, Oxford Circle, and others in the Northeast. While much urban policy is consumed with gentrification and growth on the one hand, and decline and disinvestment on the other, middle neighborhoods are suspended in between. They're neither the richest nor the poorest sections of the city, and they're defined neither by rapid development nor equivalent decline. They are defined by their relative stability, yet they face their own risks of falling through the cracks while decision makers are looking and spending money elsewhere. Middle neighborhoods exist in other parts of the city, but in the context of the Northwest and Northeast specifically, they add another dimension to these factors that work against building ghosts in these areas. The comparative stability of middle neighborhoods results in a certain stasis in the built environment. Without acute pressures from either side of the development equation, middle neighborhoods see less churn than their more dynamic counterparts. It's not enough then for the buildings in the Northwest and the Northeast to be both old and attached. For a building ghost to materialize, middle neighborhoods would have to experience the turnover that comes with demolition. Northwest and Northeast Philadelphia bear out the principle that building ghosts are an artifact of space and time, people and place. The exceptions in these neighborhoods underscore the ubiquities in others, and vice versa. The conditions of geography, architecture, history, and change must all align in order to produce the building ghosts we encounter in our cities. So if building ghosts are the remnants and reminders of demolished buildings, then are Northwest and Northeast Philadelphia better or worse off for not having them? So I'm going to share two specific vignettes or ghost stories, if you want, from the book for some of the few ghosts we did find. This is 6651 to 53 Germantown Avenue, constructed in 1922 and demolished in 2020. There was a time in the early 20th century when Eugene Raymond Jr. dabbled in buying and selling single parcels. By the 1920s, though, the lawyer and developer had larger ambitions. A handful of commercial properties here, a few dozen dwellings there. He carved out a particularly large domain in Germantown, penciling out lots for houses on both sides of Horter Street and developing two-story retail fronts and apartments around the corner on Germantown Avenue. By November 1922, he was advertising the completion of 9 storefronts at 6639 through 53 Germantown Avenue, including the one that got demolished here. For many of his other projects scattered throughout Philadelphia, he made sure to mention the architect in newspaper notices. For these relatively modest mixed-use buildings, though, he was mum. In Eugene Raymond Jr.'s words, these buildings presented, quote, a wonderful opportunity for gents furnishings, meats and provisions, barber shop, hardware and paint, baker, auto accessories, etc. The advertisement was practically a premonition. In the 98 years that this building stood, it hosted half of those exact commercial uses, as well as a variety store and an amusement arcade, both of which would seem to fall under the etc. in his notice. The first step was a salon, which was extant at number 6651 by 1924, if not earlier, under the care of Catherine Rayner. The daughter of Northern Irish immigrants, Catherine, who was born Catherine Brown, had been married to Thomas Rayner, a son of English immigrants, since 1913. They lived a typical life over the store on Germantown Avenue, with Catherine commuting downstairs while Thomas left for his job as a clerk. In late 1939, Thomas Rayner died at 58. Catherine's brother, Robert Brown, moved in with her above the salon. But Robert was not home on New Year's Day in 1940 when a fire broke out in the apartment of number 6651, sparked by a forgotten cigarette or a short circuit in a lamp. Investigators never determined the actual cause. A passerby saw the flames in Catherine Rayner's apartment and called for fire trucks. That neighbor was too flustered, though, to name the right address, sending firefighters to 5614 Germantown Avenue instead, 10 blocks away. The delay was deadly. While the firefighters raced more than a mile in the wrong direction, neighbors watched in helpless horror as Rayner appeared at the second floor window several times, screaming and trying to break the glass as her clothes caught fire. When the fire trucks finally arrived and crews threw ladders against the building to reach her, they confronted the realities of a fire in January. One ladder slipped on the icy pavement and a firefighter fell 20 feet to the sidewalk, fracturing his heel. By the time they finally gained access to the apartment over the salon, Rayner was unconscious and burned. She was pronounced dead before the ambulance even reached the hospital. Her family and friends gathered a few days later at St. Madeleine Sophie Church in Mount Airy, burying Catherine Rayner just 6 months after doing the same for her husband, Thomas. Somehow, life at 6651 continued after the grim events in 1940, and the address became associated once again with happy occasions. 2 years later, Helen Briner used the address to apply for a marriage license with Walter Simon Jr. Her parents, Lawrence and Catherine Briner, had purchased the building from Robert Brown and opened Graham's Variety Store, where Catherine Rayner's salon had been. While their 22-year-old daughter married and presumably moved away, the Briners seemed to have lent some stability to the building again. They owned and operated Graham's Variety Store for more than 2 decades, maintaining the apartments on the restored second floor above. By the early 1970s, the Briners had both died, Lawrence in 1973 and Catherine just a year later, and the building's new owner applied for a permit to repurpose the building as an amusement arcade. Living in the apartments over the store would now mean living above a series of coin-operated pinball machines. Whether it was the noise or for some other reason, the amusement arcade was relatively short-lived. By 1978, a new building permit proposed to use the retail space as a paint store for autos only. 2 of Eugene Raymond Jr.'s wonderful opportunities combined into one, it would seem. For the next several decades, the building's retail space passed in and out of vacancy before being demolished in 2020. As of 2023, when we were writing the book, and I actually should circle back and see what the latest is, after a few years of pandemic-related delays, the local Community Development Corporation, Mount Airy CDC, planned to construct a mixed-use building on the site, including rental housing on the upper floors and commercial space on the ground floor. Perhaps a bakery or a gents furnishing shop will move in, and Eugene Raymond Jr.'s forecast will be complete. .215 East Logan Street was constructed around 1866 and demolished in 1995. Designed and constructed together in the 1860s, the residences at 213 and 215 East Logan Street must have been complementary in every way. By 2020, though, only 213 could show off the trademarks of their original Italianate design. The projecting first-story bay with its arched windows, the stacked coin stones at the corner of the building, the bracketed cornice and vaulted mansard roof that both met an unceremonious end where 215 East Logan Street used to start. All of these distinctive features had been missing their twins, identical or otherwise, since the 1990s, when 215 East Logan Street was severed from its companion, leaving only a jumbled, plastered building ghost on their brick party wall. For more than a century, the twins shared a fate. Built together as outlying farms became suburban residences for well-to-do Philadelphians, they moved up and down on the economic ladder in tandem with the prosperity or impoverishment of their Germantown neighborhood. When one side hosted craftsmen and stenographers and curators in the early 20th century, the other was home to a minister and an engineer. As one half was subdivided into tenement housing in the mid-century, the other was partitioned as well. Only 213 East Logan Street, by the way, the building you're seeing here, the one that the ghost is on, was the home of future Supreme Court Justice Owen J. Roberts, named to the court in 1930 by President Herbert Hoover. He lived here around 1899, just after graduating law school. By 1940, the buildings shared a party wall and an owner. Herbert Walter Sims and his wife Delia purchased number 215 in 1937 and number 213 3 years later. With both halves in hand, the duplex became a compound of sorts, expanding in footprint and families over the next decade as multiple generations of the Sims family either moved themselves in or collected rent from other tenants. At number 215, the trajectory started with a new garage, the permit for which was approved in 1938. As of that application, the house ostensibly hosted just one family. Within 2 years, however, it was home to 5 families, and Herbert Sims was applying for a building permit to nudge a 6th family into the address. The city's zoning board initially denied the permit, concerned that the property could not house so many people safely in its current condition. So the new garage, built just a few years earlier, had to go, along with a portion of the existing porch, in order to erect a 1-story addition using fireproof materials. Once those changes were made, the expanded use appears to have passed muster, and the patchwork of plastered closets, hallways, and bedrooms visible in the building ghost now served 6 families rather than 5. Among them were Herbert and Delia Sims themselves, who lived in number 215 while their adult son, Atwood Arthur Sims, lived with his family on the other side of the brick wall at number 213. When 31-year-old Atwood registered for the draft in October 1940, just a few months after Herbert and Delia purchased number 213, he updated his registration card to reflect his new address on Logan Street. When asked to vouch for someone who would be able to track him down in case of an emergency, he listed his father residing just next door. By the late 1940s, Atwood's younger brother, Clyde, also got involved in managing the twins on Logan Street, after returning from 5 years of active duty in the U.S. Army during World War II. In 1948, he and his father negotiated several real estate transactions related to number 215, and in 1950, he was responsible for an effort to expand 213 from 5 families to 7. With members of the Sims family installed on both sides of the duplex, they could collect rent from up to 11 other families at a time. The Sims father and sons apparently leaned on one another as much as their buildings did. Even after they sold the buildings and moved apart, Herbert relocated to Florida, Atwood relocated to Chestnut Hill, while Clyde lived on East Penn Street in Germantown. Their deaths turned out to be as intertwined as their lives and structures on Logan Street once were. In January 1967, Atwood Arthur Sims died at 57. 5 months later, his father Herbert passed away. In October of that same year, Clyde suffered a fatal heart attack. Within a single year, all of the men in 2 generations of the Sims family had died. Meanwhile, the inseparable houses on Logan Street fell into increasing disrepair together. In 1979, city inspectors noticed concerning conditions at the rear of both properties and published a warning notice in the Philadelphia Inquirer mandating that the structural issues be repaired within 10 days or risk being demolished by the city. In actuality, it took 15 or so more years before the threat materialized, but sometime in the 1990s, 215 East Logan Street was demolished, severing it from its twin after 130 years. The surviving side, meanwhile, was included within the outer edges of the local East Logan Street Historic District in 2010, but the designation could not counteract an accumulating pile of building code violations and failed inspections. How many of those structural issues were the result of the loss of its twin? In 2020, the owner, a real estate holdings limited liability company, pulled a demolition permit for 213. When it was torn down, taking the ghost of number 215 with it, the building's twin fates converged once again, this time for good. By way of a coda for our conversation today, puncturing the urban fabric and giving us pause, building ghosts offer evidence of patterns that are neither accidental nor incidental. They somehow manage to remind us of a structure's disposability and its permanence, speaking in the same breath to a city's development and its destruction. Such dynamism is essential to the understanding of Philadelphia and any other city. The stories and lives exerted in our book would not exist without it. Marking and mourning the presence of building ghosts, then, is not about stopping time or halting change. These ghosts are proof of the very futility of such an endeavor. In the end, building ghosts are an insistence that these places are not empty canvases or blank slates. What place is? They are fragments that will simply be folded into the kaleidoscopic city around them, a century in the future, a year away, or an hour from now. With that, I want to open it up for any questions you all might have. Yeah.
Do the zoning laws have any effect on what can be torn down and rebuilt or not? Because there are a lot of row houses in Chestnut Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so.
Yes, there are. The question was, does the zoning law have an effect on what can get torn down and built in Philadelphia? Yes, as does the Philadelphia Historical Commission and the designations that they oversee. And your point about there being a lot of row houses in Chestnut Hill. It's true, there are. I think, and there have been plenty that have been torn down, as we all know, in recent decades. So I think building ghosts would show up sporadically up here, and that's why there are a few examples. But they're probably pretty short-lived, because when they come down, something immediately replaces them. So even if they were there briefly while we were trying to find ghosts, they might have, come and gone. So I think that's one explanation. But to your original question, yes, zoning laws have some say as to what a building can be replaced by or if it can be demolished at all. But there's usually, some latitude in how that gets applied.
Could you speak to the architectural or building techniques that bind together 2 row houses and enables one to be torn down without affecting the other one?
Yeah, sometimes that goes well and sometimes it does not, because they are built together, and when you take the other one away, it does contribute to some structural integrity issues. So there have definitely been cases where when one building was demolished, it made the next building so vulnerable that it collapsed or had to come down later. But in terms of how they're actually built, I'll go back to that montage. Don't get seasick while I go quick. So first off would be these joist pockets, which if you think of Lincoln logs, where they notch together, that's these joist pockets. These would have usually heavy timbers notched into the brick walls. So the brick wall is the envelope, as we call it, and then these joists are what give it the structural integrity to maintain that shape. When a building gets demolished, the brick is technically the party line between two buildings goes straight through that brick wall. They're actually leaving a little bit of the demolished building standing by leaving this ghosted wall in place. Like technically, if you were being letter of the law about it, you would slice down the middle of the brick wall. Of course, that's insane to consider, like the logistics of that. So what we're seeing is actually the smidge of the old building left standing. But basically, it's that combination in the case of brick construction of brick walls, joist pockets, and structural framing interplayed with each other. And then, you know, these painted or plastered traces are just applied to the brick, as is tile, as is wallpaper. So that all is, you know, slapped on that underlying material. Mm-hmm.
So when that's done, then the building that's left standing,
Mm-hmm.
that structure can also be a jeopardy for...
Yeah, so sometimes you see bracing added to an empty lot, especially if they're like buying time for future construction. You know, they'll add bracing until something fills this empty lot, because that wall, that whole block was designed to hold each other up. And you've made it a little bit more vulnerable by pulling that away, especially if it's like a mid-block demolition, and especially, again, if they're excavating basements further, which has really contributed to some issues around the city that they're trying to crack down on. So, yes, there's this underlying reality, structural engineering reality of how these were designed to be built, and then what it is if you chip away at them.
Are there people that own, like the buildings that you showed,
Mm-hmm.
that were left standing,
Mm-hmm.
they're vacated, so who owns them? I mean, do they have, I guess, well, if they're not taking care of it,
Yeah.
and it starts,
It can be compounding issues, yes.
so is that part of the housing then, jurisdiction in the city?
Well, it really runs the gamut. Sometimes we're talking about, you know, that the property owner next door is maintaining their building and they just happen to have a neighbor that sold their building to a developer, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not necessarily a commentary on the building that's left standing, but often if the neighboring building is in poor condition, then yeah, it might also be accumulating code violations. There's a Department of Licenses and Inspections that is in charge of keeping track of making sure everything is safe. And so that's why in several of Michael's photos, he was saying this building has also come down since we took our photo, probably because similar problems that afflicted the Building Ghost building also were present in the neighboring buildings, so they eventually both met the same fate.
No, it's like dominoes for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
But like I said, sometimes it's not that they're all in poor condition or anything. Sometimes the building that got demolished is not in poor condition. That's part of what we're critiquing, is an attitude of disposability that can just treat it as, you know, oh, it was 50 years old, must be replenished with something newer and cheaper or whatever, you know. So it's not automatic that the building that got demolished was in bad condition at all. Was there a question over here? I saw him.
Or if the, like the property that was next door, they said they demolished this building because they were gonna build a 4-story apartments, yet it's not there.
Yeah.
So then, you know, that's,
Yeah, the worst case scenario, as far as I'm concerned, is to demolish the building for something new, but then something falls apart for the new building. financing, or the owner has other issues to deal with or something, and so nothing replaces it, and that's, then you've lost it for nothing.
Visit Jewelers Row.
Yeah.
I was just there yesterday.
Yeah.
Oh,
That'll give you a great example of
yeah.
this whole, greedy phenomenon.
Yeah, Jewelers Row at 7th and Sansom had some building ghosts for a while.
They're still there, as of yesterday.
Oh, okay, because what we didn't directly comment on today, but is in the book, is building ghosts often get stuccoed over. So there was a building the one I showed you on Rittenhouse Square. When that first got demolished, of course it would have had plaster and wallpaper or paint or whatever you would have seen. But then they added a coat of stucco to seal it and everything, and technically that's what you're supposed to do. So anytime we see a building ghost that's more raw, as we call it, that's technically supposed to have been sealed off, but I appreciate when the stucco still shows us what was there, but I also, of course, appreciate when there's more evidence of what was there, because they didn't stucco it.
They stucco. I'm thinking of the graffiti.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah.
They definitely had to stucco above.
Jewelers Row.
Yeah.
Yes.
When you made your trek around the city, how did you first know where you wanted to go, or did you have a plan, or?
Yeah.
You started up in Northern Liberties, but it seems like you did a lot of work down, south of us.
Yeah, we had to be as methodical as possible in order to feel like we had covered our ground. So, I had maps, and the way we often divided it up is that I would go driving all over, or bus or whatever, and I would write down any that I saw, and Michael would go photograph them, and of course he would find some too as he was moving around the city. So we were, passing the baton back and forth. So when I would go out, I would have maps and try to know, like, today I'm trying to cover Manioc, and I would try to be as deliberate as possible of like how I go through Manioc to know that I'm also catching glimpses of the side streets and stuff. And then once you get into the less gridded parts of the city, it obviously got a little more complicated, but I was keeping track of using maps on my phone and using physical maps to make sure I got good coverage. Like I was doing a geolocated thing on my phone where it was keeping track of where I was going, and so I'd look at it later and make sure, did I actually get everywhere I should have, or do I need to double back and see anything?
Yeah, I more of a comment than a question. I really liked how you gave the story of the building's residents, or the people that had lived there, or businesses. I think those are so important.
Yes.
Because it's history, and people may want to know their history, what it is.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, there's 40 of those stories in the book, of which you heard 2 today. The subtitle of our book is Past Lives and Lost Places in a Changing City. So it was as important to us to be dignifying those people and those layers of the lives that they lived there, in addition to just fixating on the physical traces, because the physical traces devoid of those life stories is rather shallow.
So I live in Germantown, and while you were correct, I haven't seen many building ghosts. We do have a lot of precarious lots, just where I'm something was here that's just not here anymore.
Yeah.
And this makes me kind of want to because you told the story, there's an empty lot across the street from my house.
Yeah.
This lot is gone, and it's not quite big enough. It would be a very narrow house to live there. So I'm not sure what was there, but now I really want to go to I think Germantown has an office where you can go and see what happened on the property or whatever. But now I'm very curious because you made me want to look and see what was there. It's not necessarily a building ghost, but something was there.
Absolutely.
There was a history to that spot of earth, and it's clearly, and now it's just a garden and open space. But so we might not have the ghosts. But we have a lot of
anything that points to a trace. Yes,
Yeah.
and that's an itch for me that I always have to scratch. So feel free to send me an address and I'll go take it. That's the part I love.
I'm really curious. I look at it every day out my window. I'm
Yeah.
How are you?
That's nice.
She's proposing
That'll be book number 2.
Yeah, there we go. I know, there have been conversations along the way where people were, and by the way, our editor is in the back. Thank you to Erin for editing this book. But people have come up with other ways to slice this theme for us. Well, thank you so much for having us, and have a good rest of your week.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. That was fascinating. I'm definitely going to wander the city now looking for building ghosts. If you are interested in the book, it is a beautiful book. It is back there, and they have it for sale, so please stop by and pick it up if you're interested in that. Also, do join us next month for our final forum of the season. We will have Nelson Diaz will be with us. If you don't know, he was the first Latino lawyer to pass the Pennsylvania bar and the first Latino judge in Pennsylvania. He has a very interesting story, and he will be here. But thank you again for coming today. Have a great rest of your afternoon.